Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for coming along this evening. My name is Rachel Clark. I'm a member of Compass, Bristol and West, who are hosting tonight's event. Just to give you a bit of information about Compass, we are an organisation both national and locally who want change. We bring together people and parties to ensure a new kind of politics after the next election. We want a more democratic, more equal and more sustainable society. We want to overcome our tribal loyalties and do what is needed to get a progressive government in power at the next election. If we divide, then they, the Tories, will conquer. Compass's aim is that we work together to stop that happening. So just a bit of housekeeping about tonight's event. We have a chat function. If we could keep it civil and courteous in the chat, please. If you would like to ask a question, please put it in the chat, but please prefix it with a Q so that we know it's a question and not a comment. If you'd like to introduce yourself or say anything about yourself and why you're here, please feel free to do so in the chat. And also, just to let you know, we are recording this event, so if you don't want to be seen, please turn off your video. Artemis D. Bear has kindly agreed to chair this evening's event. Artemis is involved in many projects, including being the founder of UBI Labs Bristol, which campaigns for a universal basic income trial in our area, and running The Garden, a consent-based learning community in St. Werburgh's. Artemis, thank you so much for giving up your time this evening to be with us. I will now hand over to you to introduce Jerome, this evening's candidate. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Rachel, for that lovely introduction, and welcome Jerome, who is the the Green candidate for the West of England Mayor and also the deputy leader of the Green group of councillors, and has a successful background in business. And I'd like to start by asking you to just introduce your vision for your candidacy.
Thank you very much. And it's very nice to be among friends who share such similar political values. I'm going to give a little bit of background just on the Metro Mayor role first. So the authority combines I've got a little bit of a soundy glitch, but as long as people can hear me okay, that's fine for me. Yeah, okay, good. So at the moment, the authority includes South Gloucestershire, Bath and North East Somerset, and so it doesn't yet include North Somerset, and it doesn't include really important regional functions like the airport or half of the port. And the mayor's got particular responsibilities for the planning of homes, transport and jobs in the region, with a minimum budget of about £30 million a year, compared to, say, Bristol's budget, which is about 350 million a year. And that budget comes from direct government. But in reality, it would probably be at least double that. It's a much more collaborative role in its design than the Bristol mayoral role. Pretty much full consensus is needed across the constituent authorities for money to be spent. And it's also got some responsibility and budget for the natural environment. Just to sort of say a bit about myself, in terms of my background and political journey, I grew up in a farming community in rural Gloucestershire. And I went to a comprehensive school in Chipping Camden, sort of in North Gloucestershire. And from there, I went to Oxford University, where, like many politicians, I studied philosophy and economics. But I've also believed from a young age that to make effective political change, you need politicians, businesses, and people understanding each other and working together. So after university, I worked for a management consultancy. And then I've set up a business, a safety business, which has become a national business with over 80 staff, which I was managing director of until I became a councillor in 2015. And that business background, you know, unusually for left-wing politicians, has given me a really strong understanding of business and the sort of management experience to lead and manage larger organisations. I moved to Bristol in the early 90s with my wife Catherine, who's a GP locally, and it's an amazing place to live and raise a family with all the benefits of city life and the sort of wonderful countryside on our doorstep that you're also familiar with. And I'd love to play my part in making sure that the quality of life here least as good for the next generation as it has been for mine. In terms of my party political development, I was a Labour Party member for over 20 years, and an active member of the environmental part of the Labour Party, which I'm sure many of you will be familiar with. But I did become disillusioned by the Labour Party's lack of commitment on environmental action. So I joined the Green Party in 2013, and as you've heard, I became Clifton's first Green Councillor in 2015. I felt that the environment was an add-on for Labour, and I was much happier being part of a party which had commitment to the environment, its absolute core. But I also recognise, and I'm sure we'll come on to this in the questions, that we do very much live in a two-party system. And so it's really important that as well as being politicians in power as Green Party politicians, we play a really important role in influencing how the Labour Party operates. And I think that we've seen that to a reasonable degree in Bristol over the last 5 years, with Carla Denyer, my fellow councillors, passing of the climate emergency motion, and with the active travel agenda. I think Labour has been led by the group of us as Green councillors. And I've focused mainly on environmental issues, but also on a range of quality of life issues. So opposing the airport expansion, working on air quality, promoting more livable neighbourhoods, making sure that we get the development of the Cumberland Basin right. So moving on to sort of how I would, my priorities as Metro Mayor, I think the first thing that I would do would be to publicly oppose the expansion of Bristol Airport, because it's incompatible with reaching the zero carbon future that we all know that we need. And we as Greens are not opposed to airports full stop. We just think that Bristol Airport is big enough, and the carbon cost in terms of the million extra tonnes of carbon emissions each year just isn't a price worth paying in terms of the employment benefits and our need to get to a zero carbon future. We already have, to some extent, a green recovery plan in the region. I really would like to be, and I will be, picking up on the opportunity for a Green New Deal in our region. So that's taking the regional recovery plan and strengthening and improving its compatibility with the climate emergency goals for 2030 that we've set locally, and at a national level that's been set at 2050. There's a recognition after COVID and with COP26 coming later this year that bigger change is possible, and there is now a more supportive environment to make the changes that we know are essential. I'm really keen working both across party political boundaries and with local communities, so with parish councils, with town councils, to decide how best to spend funding. COVID has shown how important our local communities are and the services. When our communities are strong, we know what an amazing job they can do, and we've seen that in Bristol and across the region with food banks and the way that neighbours have helped each other out through this crisis. We know that climate change needs really serious and strong action, and that means moving away from the polluting futureless industries and towards the sort of cleaner, greener ones. And I think that's an area where my business background and my background in creating jobs enables me to see opportunities that are there, see practical opportunities that are there, and work with a range of people and businesses to make the investments. And making those investments and supporting those new industries in a way that helps families who currently are relying on ageing industries, so that we can all make that move towards a more carbon-free future together with nobody left behind. And the particular area for investment is the way that we use the adult education budget in WECA. There's about £13 million a year that is spent on skills and training. I think that there are ways that can be focused much more on the jobs of the future. And I think that as well as just the physical education colleges, that we should be looking, we could afford to be developing an online training offer. I know as an employer how important it is that how there are missing skills, new employees, and how easy it can be with good online training to actually enhance the skills level. Obviously, one of the big areas for moving to the lower carbon future is how we get ourselves a better transport system. And again, as we come out of lockdown, we've seen just how quickly traffic and pollution can return to those pre-COVID levels. And by addressing the challenge of transport congestion in particular, I think we'll be able to secure the buy-in that's needed to improve public transport and walking and cycling. Everybody knows that we've got a big problem with congestion. At peak times, move through central Bristol and Bath at speeds of 6 miles an hour, and that's not good enough. And that needs a sort of two-track approach really to it. One is tackling the issue of excessive car use, and the other is investing in better public transport with greater control of our buses and investing in active travel, so that we're reducing the demand for cars at the same time as we are providing the better alternatives. As well as transport, getting the building of homes right in the region is crucial. The previous Metro Mayor, Tim Bowles, who's stepping down, failed to come up with a spatial development plan. That's the regional plan which determines where new housing should be built. Obviously, the priority for any incoming Metro Mayor will be working with the local authorities to establish where is it that these energy efficient homes and communities of the future are going to be built, so that we can really demonstrate that there is a better alternative to either inner city high-rise tower blocks or car-dependent housing estates in pristine countryside. We want homes that are well connected to services, that are warm, are affordable, and they're in places where people want to live. So if I've been elected as Metro Mayor, how might things have changed after a couple of terms? So we'll have shifted much more to a zero carbon future. We won't be using fossil fuels. We'll have a much stronger local food economy, a healthy local food. We'll have new homes in the right places. Our natural world will be more valued, and all life, human, plant and animal, will be thriving. Our local economies will be thriving, and young people will have access to fulfilling training and employment. Our roads will be safe for all road users, and we'll be able to get around easily using affordable public transport or cycling, and we'll have invested in better walking. So that's my vision of a Green New Deal for the West of England. And I very much look forward to hearing your questions and answering some of the details that I'm sure you'll be interested in.
Great, thank you, Jerome. We've got some questions from Compass for you, and the first one is on a subject that's very dear to my heart, which is universal basic income. So what are your views on universal basic income?
I think it's a great idea, and I'm very supportive of universal basic income. I think the challenges that we've got are the cost of, I think the moral case for universal basic income is the strongest one. We've seen during COVID the almost random nature of whether people do well or suffer badly. And it's a total patch and mend social security system that determines whether people do well or not. And a universal basic income would provide something which was fundamentally fair and would prevent these ridiculous situations where either people do really well in terms of money that they get from the government, or they do really badly, with almost a sort of random aspect to it. I think that the sort of the technical challenges with the universal basic income are what level do you set it at, and how do you deal with differing financial needs? So the universal basic income for somebody who's a homeowner is different from somebody who has to pay market rent. I think that we also need to make sure that wealth taxes are prioritised. I think that rising wealth inequality is one of the biggest economic challenges of our time. And we've also got greater public appetite for wealth taxes than we do for universal basic income at this stage. It's also easier to implement. There's a historical precedence for having wealth taxes, and as we see after the financial crisis of 2007, 2008, globally the rich became richer. After COVID, the COVID crisis, we're also seeing that the rich have become richer. And the fallacy that market capitalism lifts, benefits everybody equally has been shown to be utterly untrue over the last 30 years. Globalization has resulted in a powerful global group of people who are getting richer, and increasingly large numbers of people whose incomes are either flat or falling. We have to tackle that issue, because it means the levels of wealth difference mean that only some people are able to play a fully participating role in society, and many people have savings only enough to last for a few weeks. The position on what sort of funds, huge numbers of the population have, emergency funds just aren't there, and then the level of economic disadvantage that takes place as a result of that can be utterly debilitating. So yeah, I'm a great fan of UBI, and I'm a great fan of wealth and land taxes in line with Green Party policy.
Yeah, great, thank you. One of the questions is actually, would you support a pledge for a trial of UBI? But I'm aware that you have actually, in fact, already signed the UBI Labs Mayoral pledge, so thank you for that. So, and you've already covered the pros and cons, which is brilliant, which was the other question. So we can actually move on to the next section, which is on electoral reform. So Compass campaign for electoral reform. And I want to know if you think that our current first past the post system has any benefits.
Yeah, I think one benefit of the first past the post is the what's described as throw the scoundrels out, which is that if a ruling party has been in power for too long and gets too cozy and too comfortable, that actually a complete change of personnel can be healthy for the political system. So that's an advantage, or that is a benefit of a two-party system. But there are so many other reasons why it just doesn't work anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. And would you support a move to a more proportional voting system locally and/or nationally?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think my favourite voting system has always been the German system of mixed party lists and constituencies. You get the benefit of proportionality, but you don't lose the connection that MPs have with their constituency. And I'm not sure yet what. So I think at a national level, I'd be a great fan of a German system. At a local level, I know we need a better local system in terms of proportionality, but I'm not quite sure how it would work. Great,
thank you. So the next lot of questions is on the Progressive Alliance, or a potential Progressive Alliance. Would you be willing to work with other parties on common progressive goals?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's yeah. I mean, I am completely committed to sort of community politics with a green flavour, and community politics really means working beyond those party political boundaries.
Yeah, and completely. But I'm also aware that as a politician, it's very easy to say that, but actually in practice, like party politics can make that really tricky. So I wonder if you could elaborate on how you would see that working, particularly in the west of England.
Well, I mean, I think at a national level, we need the Labour Party to commit to proportional representation, and I think that until that happens, we're going to be struggling, really, because while the major two parties in the two-party system want to shut the other parties out, it's very difficult to have meaningful dialogue. In terms of the west of England, I mean, I think in terms of the metro mayoral model, you have to work with the other parties full stop, because so many of the decisions, as I mentioned at the start of my introduction, have to require a full consensus. So unless you get, Conservative South Gloucestershire and Liberal Democrat Baines and Labour or Green Bristol in full agreement, nothing's going to get done, and the money's just not going to get spent. So force of circumstance means that it's necessary at a West of England level.
Yeah, I mean, I guess taking things on a kind of a topic-based program, because the problem is that, like, if one party brings something and then the other parties will say, well, no, that's their thing, so we're not going to vote for that just because it's the other party, right? But if you have something that is genuinely cross-party, then it can be something that is much more likely to get through, and that's what we're trying to do with the EBI lab, for example. So it's not, it's not any associated with any particular party, so it can be it's not, anyone particularly bringing it to the table. So I wonder if maybe that's one option.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, and as Greens, I think that what we've tried very much to do that. As 11 councillors out of 70, we've chosen areas where we thought we could do that. So the first area was air quality, where we got unanimous approval on clean air zones back in 2016. We've been very disappointed with the progress, the speed at which that's happened. But air quality was something which was really collectively identified as a serious problem. And then more recently, the airport expansion. I proposed the motion at the December Full Council of Bristol, reversing the council's support of Bristol Airport expansion. And that it was jolly hard work working behind the scenes to get Labour on board for that, but we did it, and it's been very disappointing that the Labour mayor has not taken forward the collective decision of the council. But that's a problem with the constitution of Bristol Council and the mayoral model that was set up. But it was still a good example, I think, of doing cross-party working well. And I think if we can find areas like that where you can get everybody on board, it's great. And I think the other thing about those areas is, you can get the collaboration, but where you've got a lot of support, it also, people who are opposing it, their position becomes a lot clearer. So seeing the Conservatives talk green, but supporting the airport expansion, they suddenly start to look rather dumb. So finding those areas where you can command a natural majority among a range of different parties and get some real political change introduced is very exciting political work to do.
Yeah, absolutely. It's finding those shared values, isn't it?
Thank
you, Jerome. Yeah. And the last topic that we wanted to talk about was the Green New Deal. So, I mean, it seems a bit ridiculous to ask the Green candidate how committed you are to a Green New Deal, but there you go. That's your question.
Yeah, utterly. I mean, I think it's a question of how much money we can get for it. I mean, I think we've seen with both the financial crash and the COVID finances that billions and billions can suddenly be found when there's a crisis that is deemed sufficiently important. But those crises have to be presenting immediate in-your-face problems rather than the longer burn of the climate emergency and the ecological emergency. So what we have to do as green politicians, whether capital G or small g, is get that sense of absolute shared priorities, that what we're facing is a major crisis and a major opportunity to change the nature of our society so that it can become more flourishing, and provides, really solid platform for a sustainable future. So,
yeah, thank you. What would your priorities be for a West of England Green New Deal?
So I think if I take transport, I think that investing in proper cycling and walking infrastructure, the reason that people don't cycle, the number one reason, much higher than the others, is that they don't feel safe. And creating properly invested, segregated cycling and walking routes is a really important part of giving people a better alternative to cars. And all we need to do is go up to the levels of spend that our European friends have put in place. It's not something that hasn't been done before. It's all pretty straightforward. Investing in public transport and providing some restrictions on cars so that financially, when you're choosing whether to take the train or the bus or to cycle, that the most environmentally friendly form of transport also has the right pricing attached to it, so that it's the environmental costs are reflected in the actual price that you pay. And I think so transport's key, housing is key in terms of the energy efficiency of our housing stock, and the poor quality of our housing stock, really probably the worst in Europe in terms of energy efficiency and quality. Developing investing in those improvements, and making sure that the worst homes of the most disadvantaged people in society are those that are prioritized for improvements, and supporting the skills that are needed in order to get that energy efficiency program in place. The sort of final strand, I mean, there's so many priorities within each of them, but I think getting a more localized food economy is key. We do know that industrial meat consumption, industrial meat processes are such a large source of carbon emissions, deforestation, and as part of that food localization approach, we need to have a sort of more balanced approach on how we talk about meat consumption.
Great, thank you, Jerome. It would be really lovely to move on to some questions from people who have come onto the event. So I'd like to start by asking Jo Sargent to ask her question, please. Jo, would you like to join us?
Yes, I'm here. Sorry. It's like my fingers and thumbs. Yeah, I've remind myself of my question now. It's right at the top, isn't it? It was basically a question about the relationship between the constituent authorities in WECA, and you can include North Somerset in that, because in some respects it is a member, in other respects it's not. But it's that issue of how I mean, I know there's a lot of egos involved in sort of the negotiations and the the top table and all of that, but it's recognizing the difference between the needs of a big city where a lot of people come to work and you know, much more densely populated, and the other members that are more rural and perhaps have a different needs. So I just wondered if you could just give us an idea of how you would kind of juggle that relationship.
I don't think it's particularly challenging. I mean, I think the thing that people are most enthusiastic about in the villages and towns is getting a stronger sense of community, and that's been very because community has been so strong during COVID. If you talk as a politician to investing in communities, supporting communities, there's a great appetite that's there. And with the funds that WECA has, there have been some really great examples of community wealth building through the region. You know, whether it's energy efficiency programs or village shops or people buying pubs together. And I mean, you'll know from Avonmouth that, you know, how that can galvanise the local community, Joe. I mean, so finding the things that can enthuse communities, giving them the sense that there's some money there to do it. Quite often, people in villages and towns feel that they've not been listened to by local politicians. So getting that participation going and formalising it a bit with community forums and giving people some money to spend as well. You know, whether it's leisure facilities or, you know, pedestrian crossings or, you know, village shops or community energy improvement programs. I think that's going straight to the people, I think, is what I would say.
Thanks, Jerome. We have a question from Hilary. Would you like to ask your question, Hilary?
Okay. Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. What I really like to hear from all the candidates is actually what really practical steps can be taken. Obviously, both. I mean, I live in Bristol, in the city of Bristol, but obviously outside Bristol. To mitigate climate change, because what I hear is, oh yes, this is really important, so on and so forth. But actually, passing the necessary legislation to prevent pollution and mitigate climate change, and the money that's required to kind of, I don't know, there's just so much. And I just hear all the time, oh yes, well, this is our aspirations and we'd like to do this and that's great. And but there's all these challenges and we're not really quite sure how and when this is going to happen. We need some really, really practical steps to be taken. And I would like to hear what Jerome would do.
Great question, Hilary. Thank you.
Thank you, Hilary. I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, I think the greenwash is a sort of national speciality, I think. And at a local level, you know, calling out, what are the carbon, in terms of climate change, we've set the climate emergency with a zero carbon intention by 2030. That means reducing our carbon emissions pretty much by 15%-ish a year, every year for the next 10 years. And in order to do that, we need to look at the biggest sources of carbon emissions and work out how we're going to drive them down fast. And we also need to avoid the unrealistic expectations that we're going to have planes running on hydrogen to do that in time, or electric cars that will, you know, completely stop emissions. And when we're looking at the biggest areas, I would say that it's making sure we've got clean energy, and clean energy means that that we're working with renewables, you know, wind, solar, and stopping carbon emissions in the first place. So for us as a city and a region, energy efficiency really matters. So renewable energy generation, reducing our energy consumption. And in terms of travel, I mentioned before, I think the airport is, we must stop unnecessary increases in emissions and becoming carbon literate. So looking at what our carbon emissions are in the region, and understanding what it is that allows us to drive them down is really important. So stopping the airport expansion. And then when we're looking at our transport system, the average person's carbon footprint in Britain, I think, is about 8 tonnes, of which 2 tonnes relates to, between 1 and 2 tonnes, relates to use of cars. So it's a huge part of the national carbon footprint, and the biggest change that we can make in terms of the area where the Metro Mayor has power is getting people out of cars and onto public transport and active travel measures. So I mean, I've covered that to some extent already. And then the next area which the mayor has less responsibility for, but is absolutely, it's what is identified by the International Panel on Climate Change as being key, is our food system. So more locally grown food, more fruit and vegetables, less meat, and that will also mean less land that is used. Something like 40 to 50% of land globally is used to grow animal feed. And by shifting to a more plant-based diet, we're able to free land up, which also allows other forms of life to flourish and reduces the risks of zoonotic diseases and other pandemics that we might face. It sort of and stops deforestation. So I'm not sure whether that adequately addresses your sense of the short-term priorities. It gives more of a big picture, I think, but it does say it's working on the areas where there are the biggest carbon emissions and working out how quickly we can drive those down. We almost need a sort of an electricity meter for the city and the region, a smart meter that shows our energy consumption and how fast it's coming down on a yearly basis.
Great, thanks, Jerome. The next question is from David Redwell. I think, David, you might have a couple of questions, so please feel free to ask both while you're here.
Thanks very much, Chair. I think, Jerome, my question really is about buses, and we've had the question before, but WECA's on a very tight timescale. I've been sat in on the Department for Transport seminar this morning to bring into place either a quality contract or advanced quality partnerships in place in May next year with North Somerset Council. And I just wondered where you think we're going to be going to reorganise the buses in the next literally 12, 18 months maximum. We haven't been given 4 years like Manchester to sort of look at franchising. And then and that's with North Somerset, I should guess. And the other question really, I suppose, is about light rail and heavy rail, and where do you see WECA? I make the same assumption as Joe does about North Somerset Council being a member of WECA as soon as we can physically get them in there. How do you see the rail service and light rail service being developed? And I wouldn't be suffice to say that without mentioning the ferries, Bristol Ferry Boat Company are obviously very much coming back in the harbour in I believe May in Bristol, but what about water transport and using it for commuters in Bristol's harbour and also in Bath? Thanks.
Thank you, David. And I also see you've asked a question about North Somerset joining. I mean, I think in terms of the buses, I mean, at the moment, the buses are being paid for. The buses and trains are pretty much fully nationalised and are being paid for by the government. And how it is, what kind of sustainable public transport system emerges after that is going to be very much open to discussion and debate. I talked with Patricia Greer, the chief executive of WECA, the other day, and she was indicating that they didn't really have a clear understanding from government on what the process was for talking with governments about the quality contracts. So I would start from the kind of first principle that the bus system, if we take the bus system before COVID, we didn't have, it's basically a private system with a little bit of subsidy for selected routes. And we need to shift to a system where we can specify which routes buses are running along, which providers are running along those routes, and make sure that the profitable routes, so on the White Ladies Road, for example, is a profitable route, lots of people on it, there has been competition, making sure that we can take the profit from a route like the White Ladies Road into other areas so that we're cross-subsidising basically, and we are ensuring that we've got a genuinely workable transport system across the whole region. And I think that that's a sort of general high-level principle discussion that needs to take place with government, and then we need to work out how we back the organisational arrangements into that overall intention, with a view that we have to have a public transport system that works better. In terms of light rail and heavy rail, the challenge, over the long term, it's fantastic to be getting that into place, and it's very expensive. And we just need to have a prioritised set of routes that we are going to government for funding on, or we have a source of income locally, whether it's workplace parking levy or congestion charging, that we can invest in those more expensive longer term projects. And I'll be absolutely supportive of North Somerset joining the combined authority as soon as possible.
Thanks, Jerome. We've got the rather lovely problem of having so many questions left, and but not actually a huge amount of time to answer them in. So could I ask for both the questions and the answers to be as concise as possible from now, so we can fit in as many as possible? Yeah. I'd really appreciate it. Thank you. Our next question is from Alison Allen.
Hi there. I'm keeping my video off just because I've got very poor service here. Jerome, both WECA and the Bristol City Council have pledged to become zero carbon by 2030, including a promise to stop exporting our footprint to the global south. And our UK government has acknowledged that we're heading towards 3 degrees C. What will you do to ensure the Avon Pension Fund divests from companies which are causing global warming and rainforest destruction?
As a group of Green councillors, we've successfully lobbied for Bristol to change its position on divestment, and the Labour Party in Bristol has not adequately progressed that, so that's very disappointing. And we've got limited powers. I think it's the power of persuasion, and I also think that the Avon Pension Fund is a really fantastic. The Avon Pension Fund has got £4.5 billion invested, and it's in very conventional and often quite risky investments, some of which will be stranded assets in terms of coal and other fossil fuels. If we were to take 20% of that and spend £1 billion locally, we could invest that in housing, we could invest it in energy efficiency projects, we could invest it in food projects. There's no reason that can't take place. It's happening around the country. There are much more localized investments from pension funds, and it's very common in Germany. So those would be the power of persuasion to insist on divestment, and then the proposal of alternative investments as a much better, more secure route for investments that's already been done elsewhere. Positive impact investing.
Thanks, Jerome, and thanks for the question, Alison. Next question is from Rob Breyer. Rob, are you with us?
I can read Rob's question, so I can answer it without.
Sorry, I am here. I am here. I can read it. Sorry, I was just looking at the question and not unmuting. Hello. Given the climate emergency and transport being the only emission sector that is rising or staying level, what measures will you take to reduce carbon emissions from internal combustion engine vehicles? If elected, what concrete actions will you pursue to take cars off the road?
Thanks, Rob. I think to some extent I've already addressed that through either congestion charging or workplace parking levy on the demand management side, and on the provision of alternatives, investing in more affordable, more reliable, better connected public transport, and more investment in active and in cycling and walking infrastructure.
Yeah, that sounds good. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jerome. Next question from Paul Dunn. Hello, Paul, are you with us?
Yeah, just unmuting. Sorry, I didn't know I was next. So I was just thinking about where we were going to go on holiday in 3 years' time.
Nice.
Thanks for being here, and thanks to Compass for arranging this. Absolutely excellent. I mean, a lot of the items in your vision, Jerome, do rely on collaboration and collaborative working with others, whether it's housing, infrastructure, cars, carbon emissions, and all the rest of it. So perhaps you could say a bit more about how you would influence other people. You mentioned the Skills Fund and £13 million, which incidentally is the amount of money that the government has just cut out of the TUC's Union Learning Fund, which encourages workers to get basic skills so they can move on to the higher skills that they and the economy needs for good employment. And what's happened over recent decades, of course, is that attacks on unions have led to low-paid work, 0 hours contracts, huge dividends and fat pay packets and bonuses for executives. Not entirely within your control, obviously, but how do you make the West of England a better place for employees and workers?
So I'm just making note of, I think in terms of the way that money is spent at the moment, I think it's on quite traditional skills in the over 18s. So, trade skills in education colleges. And what I would do is I would review the satisfaction levels of both the people who've been taking those courses. I'm not sure they're being looked at rigorously enough, and anecdotal evidence is that quite often there's quite low satisfaction levels, and that the teaching is often, teaching is not often of the high, it's not always of the highest standards. So I would review the provision that is currently there and take action based on that. I would also look at skills that employees say are needed and skills that employers say are needed, so we get a better match between the two, and with specific investments in online training provision, which isn't always relevant or adequate in its own right, but certainly could be an important additional part of the mix. And this is also an area where I don't yet know enough about. So I'm not going to, unlike transport or housing, I'm more confident of my knowledge and understanding there. So I'm really interested in having views and suggestions.
Thanks, Jerome. Yeah, imagine asking young people what they think about services that they're accessing. What a radical thought.
What about the question, how you influence others to achieve your vision, because you can't do it all on your own?
Well, I think that's having it's having a clear vision in the first place, and then consulting, checking in with people whether they buy into that vision, how they would rework it, what they would do instead, what their alternative visions are, and also agreeing on the need for action. So that rather than just a culture of excessive consultation, we're getting the right balance between asking people what they think and getting stuff done.
Thanks, Jerome. We have a question from Compass's very own Eileen.
Okay, I'm going to ask a later question actually, which is, given the complete absence of major investment from the government in Green New Deal projects and the huge funding that's required to take those forward, What are your views on the City Council's current solution to that in the City Leap programme? And would you see yourself having to do something similar at a regional level?
I think that's why I talked about the Avon Pension Fund, because I think there is funding that's available within the council, and Sandy, the Green Councillor candidate for mayor, is talking about the opportunities to increase the borrowing of the council to build homes. So the council's in a strong enough financial position in order to be able to build homes with some small increase in council rent. So that is a very significant source of funding. The potential opportunity to secure funding from Avon Pension Fund, I think, is an important new initiative. It's obviously very early stage, but I think we should be knocking at that door and saying this is what takes place elsewhere around the country and elsewhere around Europe. We should be using pension funds to do positive things locally. But we've also been chastened in Bristol by the experience with Bristol Energy, which I've been sceptical about since its inception. It was strategically flawed in its design and then poorly managed. And as a result, the council lost £60 million. So when we look at City Leap, I still don't understand what City Leap is. And I've kept asking, what is City Leap? What would you spend this money on? And I have not, we haven't received a satisfactory answer. So we need just good, clear business cases that everybody can understand. And City Leap is two things. It's the ideas in the first place, and then where the funding comes from. And the funding with City Leap would come from third-party people. Well, what are they going to get out of it, I think, is the question that you ask when you're entering into large financial collaborations. They will want some significant assets as a result, and we have to work out whether that's a good deal for the city or for the region when you're entering into those sorts of partnerships.
Great, thank you. I'm afraid that's the last question that we've got time for, because it's actually almost 8:30. So I'm going to say a huge thank you to you, Jerome, for your brilliant answers tonight, and very excited about your vision. And if you want to talk about either UBI or education, let me know. I'd be very happy to talk about those things with you.
Lovely. Thank you.
I'm going to hand back over to Compass now, who are going to explain a bit more about the electoral process for this election. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Artemis.
Okay, I'm just going to share my screen and talk for a few moments about the voting system for the Metro Mayor. I hope everybody can see this. It's not a first past the post system. In the election, you can vote for two candidates in order of preference. If one candidate gets more than 50% of the votes, then they simply get through and are elected mayor. But if no candidate receives more than 50% of the first preference votes, the top two candidates with the most first preference votes go forward to the final count, and all other candidates are eliminated. And therein lies a tale of how your second vote can be wasted. So we're encouraging people to vote, to make their vote count, to choose their first vote with the candidate that they want, and the second vote to choose carefully whoever you think stands sorry, I just need to admit somebody, for the second vote, that you cast that for someone who you think stands a chance of making it into the top two and is acceptable to you. So basically, first choice with your heart, second choice with your head. Now, I thought it would be good to let you see what the actual ballot paper will look like. Did you get a first and second choice, but that's in the form of two columns where you put your first choice X in the first column and your second choice in the second column. The reason we're focusing on this is because in the last Metro Mayor election, 56% of the ballots for the second votes were discarded because the person didn't vote for anyone who had got through. So basically, if the two candidates get through and you voted for somebody who didn't get through, there's nowhere for your second vote to be counted and added. So brings us back to our message: first vote with your heart, second vote with your head. Because if you don't think about who will make it into the top two, your second vote may just go in the bin. It's not an easy thing to do. In France, they do that, but they have a gap in between where you know who the two are that go through. And in this instance, you'll have to do it while you're in the polling station. I'm just showing you this because we've got these graphics in a video and we've done it in different forms because people see things in different ways. If you want to see the videos, just go search for YouTube Compass Bristol and West and you can see the videos there. But it's just really worth thinking about that before you go to the polling station so your vote is not lost. I'll hand over now to Rachel, who will, if I can work out how to see her, I will put her on spotlight.
Thank you, Aileen.
Okay.
Can you see me? So I'm just going to, in a moment, just before we finish, just give a little bit of information about Compass. But I wondered before then, Jerome, if we wanted to just give you a couple of minutes to have a final say, any passing messages or things you'd like to leave us with, just wanted to, any questions you really want to respond any more fully to, just wanted to give you a few minutes just to kind of say anything else if there's anything that you want to let me know.
Well, no, I just want to say thank you very much for organising this event, and thank you for the spirit in which you're organising it of collaboration and shared visions. It's what sort of gives me sort of heart and hope.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jerome, and thank you, Artemis. You've given us a really interesting and entertaining evening. So just to reiterate, as I said, this event was hosted by Compass Bristol West. Compass has both national and local representation. Nationally, Compass has great fortnightly discussions and has produced some really good publications that people might find interesting, such as We Divide, They Conquer, and Belonging, Place and Nation, but really interesting publications on their website. Local groups like Compass Bristol West are really good forum to put Compass's ideas into action and to link up with other like-minded people. We know there are a lot of progressive people out there in and outside of parties. We need to find each other and work together on areas of mutual interest, such as universal basic income. So our local group meets monthly. I think there's information on both the local group and National Compass in the chat. We have representation from Labour, Greens, Lib Dems and Independents. We focus on areas such as universal basic income, a progressive alliance, electoral reform and Green New Deal, the areas that we've talked about tonight. We are working to find areas of local collaboration where we can make progress, such as having a universal basic income pilot in this area. So please get in touch with us via Facebook or email. Information is in the chat. Thank you for joining us tonight. Just to let you know, we have our third and final interview tomorrow with the Liberal Democrat candidate, Stephen Williams, and that's happening at 7 p.m. And you are all most welcome to join us for that. Thank you so much for your time this evening.